Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. They were the first women of the first state. I'm talking about the Lenape of Delaware tribe and their rich and wonderful history that is largely unknown to many of us. There is a reason to that, and we're going to get into it and learn some surprising truths. Get ready, the 302 is unveiling history. Hey 302, the story of the first women of the first state is one that you may not be familiar with, and there is a good reason for that. And that's because the people of the Lenape Delaware tribe generally didn't talk about their heritage, their ancestry, or their nationality. Now the Delaware Division of the Historical and Cultural Affairs is presenting a program to educate people not only on the first women, but also on the first tribe of Delaware. I'm joined now by Nina Todd, who is the Historic Site Supervisor with the division, and Theo Bronskill, who is a historian and an elder with the Lenape Delaware tribe. Ladies, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Nina, I wanted to jump right in and talk a little bit about the division's mission to make sure that all histories are told in an equitable way and to really get the story of the first women of the first state out there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. As you said, I work for the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, and we are a state agency housed within the Department of State. And we operate 5 museums across the state in all 3 counties. And on June the 10th, our division released a statement about race and equity. And our mission now is to strive to practice inclusive history, and we will be undeterred in bringing forth diverse and complete stories and inclusive stories. In addition, we want all of the voices to be heard. Oftentimes in history, we don't hear a lot of voices from women. We don't hear a lot of voices from Native people. We don't hear a lot of voices from African American people. We don't hear a lot of voices from young people, from children. So there is a big segment of our population that really doesn't get to tell their history. Because March is Women's History Month, we thought we would talk about the Lenape people and the women of the Lenape people, because the Lenape people are matrilineal and matriarchal.
I wanted to jump over and talk to Theo about that topic. Now, Theo, tell me a little bit more about how it's not a male-driven tribe or society. Women played a huge role, and equality was really huge with the Lenape, right?
Originally, we were mostly women. We had mostly women chiefs. We have a women chief here in Delaware right now, and we have several women chiefs around that's close by. That's the Piscataway, the Nottoway, and a few others that are close by, and they follow the traditional women's chief lead. Our principal elect chief is Denny Coker, and we have a council that is predominantly women, and we have an elders council that is predominantly women. So our leadership is there, and of course, you know that in our political community is some great leaders of women. The biggest or the main leader in our community is our grandmother, and so we could take a whole segment on just talking about grandmothers, and we plan to do that when we have our March 20th program. We'll spend more time on how highly ranked our grandmothers are.
If you can kind of maybe fill in the blanks, the tribe is focused around women. The instead of the women taking the men's names, the men take the women's names, and the women are the landowner or the people who are with the land. It's not so much an ownership, but being with the land. Can you talk to me about how it's just female driven?
Women are oftentimes, they are the founders of community. And it has a lot to do with how Native people see themselves, how they view themselves in the living environment, how they are part of the living environment. You were correct when you said a lot of it has to do with land, because land represents something very different in Lenape and Native American culture abroad. It represents something very different than what it represents in popular American culture. In popular American culture, it's a commodity. It's real estate. That's why they call it real estate, because that's real money right there. It is something you farm it, you mine it, you develop it. That's what land represents. It's a commodity and nothing more. But in Native American culture, land represents something incredibly different than that. It is an intricate living part of the culture. Land is something that is a part of us, and we are a part of it. Land is something that it bears life, it nurtures life, it protects life, and every now and again, it has to discipline life, very much like the female persuasion of all species. So because land in its life-giving is very feminine, women are usually the ones who maintain the right to own and access land, even though they don't own it. They belong to it. They are the closest thing. In many Native American languages, the same word for land is the same word for mother or the same word for woman. It is the same word. Those entities are the same because they have the exact same functions in the circle of life. So they are seen very much as land and landed. So that changes our social structure drastically, and that changes how our families and our communities are formed. Traditionally in Native American culture, when men and women come together, it is not the same as in popular American culture. When men and women come together and the man and woman marry, what's the first thing the woman does? Right?
She takes She takes the man's
takes his name.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And she becomes part of the man's clan. The man's clan knows her as part of the man's clan. The community at large recognizes her as part of the man's clan. But in Native American culture, it is very different. When men and women come together, traditionally, the man goes with the woman.
And we're going to hear more about the first women of the first state when we return.
Hi, I'm Loretta Spiegel. I'm with Rockwood Mansion, and you're watching the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the first women of the first state. And Theo, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about whenever someone from your tribe introduces themselves, they do it in a way that identifies their grandparent or their grandmother, right?
Exactly. We are, as Nina has said, we're a matrilineal society. Therefore, we introduce ourselves through our mothers. That is the Lenape way. By using a traditional introduction, this is how I would say it. My native name that was gifted to me is Three Winds. I am the daughter of Elizabeth Cooper Lewis. My maternal grandmother is Anna Mariah Mosley Cooper. My maternal great-grandmother is Elizabeth Pritchett Mosley. My great-great-grandmother is Anna Mariah Clark Pritchett. Those are my foremothers. We all are women of the Turkey Clan of the Lenape Indian tribe of Delaware.
When we talk about the first women, what kinds of roles, they obviously were leaders in the tribe. There was a lot of equality as well. So what kinds of roles did the first women of the first state take on? What kinds of things, jobs, things like that?
There were not a lot of occupations that were gender-based or sex-based. Many occupations were done by everyone. In fact, they were done by the people who could do them best. It didn't have anything to do with gender or sex. It didn't matter whether that was grinding corn or preparing food or fishing or hunting or sewing or making tools and utensils. Those things did not matter. There were very few gender-specific occupations amongst Native American communities. One of the occupations that was primarily for women, it's not to say that on occasion men didn't do it, but traditionally home building was the responsibility of women.
Whenever we talk about the first women in the Lenape tribe, and as a historian, how far back does this history go?
There is evidence of the Lenape people being here at least 14,000 years. However, I mean, it's probably much longer than that. It's just that at this point, they haven't found any archaeological evidence, but they go back pretty far.
Now, early in your career, Nina, you had some experience in Kent County with a large burial site. And we talked in the first segment about, history not being necessarily recorded accurately. Can you talk a little bit about, what you were told when you arrived there and then what was discovered once the real layers of history were peeled away?
It was the Island Field site, and when it was first discovered, when it was first uncovered, the were left on the surface, and there was a building that was built over it, and it was turned into a museum, and people could come in and see this. And I know what you're thinking. There was a lot of controversy about it. There was a lot of controversy about it then. But the summation of the archaeologists at that time was that it was a group of really tall, warring men whose occupation was making arrowheads and hunting. And they were all led by a great and powerful chief, and they all died out at an early age from a mysterious plague. And then there became a point in the state of Delaware in which they passed a law that said you can no longer have human remains on public display. So the state had to rebury all of the people in that cemetery. But they took that opportunity before they reburied them to do the forensic analysis and the osteology. And the first bit of information that came back was the average height, and the average height of those people was about 5'2" tall. The next bit of information that came back was that their diet consisted primarily of vegetation. There were some other astounding things I'm not going to talk about because we go into that in the program. But one of the things that was very interesting was there were 11 chiefs' burials in that cemetery. They were buried with elaborate funerary objects. They were placed on their backs with their arms crossed. And they were a little taller. They were a little bigger than the average population. They were about 5'5" to about 5'7" or 8 inches tall. So they were a little bit taller. But the funny thing about those 11 chiefs was they were all women.
The question is, why hasn't the Lenape tribe come forward and corrected some of this misinformation? We're going to find out when we return.
I'm George from Works of Art, and I enjoy showing my passion on 302.
Welcome back. We've been talking about the first women of the first state and the Lenape of Delaware, and basically how history rewrote what actually happened. Now, Theo, I want to ask you, why is it that the Lenape who stayed in Delaware, I know a lot of them left the area. Why didn't they correct some of this misinformation that was attached to their alleged history?
The ones that stayed behind, which was included my grandmother and her grandmother, those people were fearful for their lives. They had to they assimilated into the community, but they also had to, in order to keep quiet, they were told by their parents, you keep your mouth shut. They said you were not allowed to, uh, you know, allow people in the community to know who you really were, and that to me was when I heard those stories. That those always hurt me because I thought myself, how can you be that ashamed of your heritage, and how could you not share and be proud of who you are? But they were afraid. I think the way to help them to get over or get through this is still by through education, teaching them that it's okay, especially children. That's our goal, to teach the children to be proud of who they are, uh, and acknowledge. And I said this to even in my family. Acknowledge who your grandmother is. If you acknowledge who she is and who she was, and who her grandmother was, then it'll be easier for you to identify with the true self, your true self.
When you talk about educating, members of the tribe about their ancestry and being proud, can you guys also talk about what's being done to correct history, to make sure that the history that people are reading 5, 10, 15, 100 years from now accurately reflects the Lenape tribe?
That is one of the things that is part of our mission with the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs is we are trying to give all of those voices that were silenced. You asked the question, why didn't those people come forward and just tell the truth? They were not in a position to do that. We're talking about a people who were oppressed and violently oppressed, people who were being annihilated and violently being annihilated. They were not in a position of power to come forward and say what they had to say. They had to hide who they were and their identity, and they had to tell their children to be quiet in order to save their lives. So now that we are in a time that is awakening of historical, I would say, other groups in history, which is still our shared history. It is easier now to come forward because I think, unlike before, in the centuries before, people are willing to listen now.
One of the things I like to piggyback on what Nina has said is because especially the Island Field story, that was proof that Native Americans were here. They were here, and because that dispels that myth that our natives are all gone, because we are still here. My grandmother was here, her grandmother was here, and I am, visibly here. So we like to make sure that we share who we are and have these programs and be more so that we can be more known. And that's one of the things I also like to say is that we do this because it's important to the preservation of the Lenape Indians. But more importantly, it is traditional to know, build, and strengthen partnerships so that we all flourish.
Well, Theo, thank you very much. Nina, I thank you as well. We are out of time. We will be right back. For more information, you can go to LenapeIndianTribeOfDelaware.com. That'll do it for this week's episode. We leave you now with a beauty shot of Wilmington. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. We'll see you on the 302.